Well, let's talk more about Francois-Philippe Champagne's first budget as finance minister. We're now joined by Sharon D'Sousa. Ms. D'Sousa is the national president of the Public Service Alliance of Canada. Sharon D'Sousa, thanks for dropping by again.
It's my pleasure to be here.
So a big budget tomorrow, and already your union seems very concerned about what's coming down the pipes. Why are you concerned?
Well, I have to say, when you start saying that this is going to be an austerity budget, and when you're talking about going to pre-pandemic workforce, what we're talking about is a difference of 70,000 jobs at a time where our economy has been hit the hardest, and mainly because people depend on those services. It concerns me greatly because at the end of the day, these workers live in small communities, and how do they expect these communities to prosper? That would be a huge impact on their economy, let alone at a time where people are depending on public services. And we've already seen 10,000 cuts just last year, and they're feeling the brunt of it. So who's going to make sure that that safety net is there?
Mm-hmm. You know, I want to bring up a tweet that you and your organization put out on Friday, because in this tweet you write, "Our public services are stretched to the limit. Cutting support for families, veterans, and seniors now isn't physically responsible, it is reckless." That echoes in a lot of ways what you're saying, but with that tweet, when I look at some of the reaction to what was sent out, there are people scratching their heads. They wonder why you are stretched to the limit when the Parliamentary Budget Officer says that the public service has grown by over 105,000 full-time positions, ending fiscal 23-24. Why are your members stretched to the limit?
Well, first of all, we've increased our programs that we deliver. The population has increased, and it's become more complicated. And at the end of the day, you need to have people to deliver the services. When you look back at where the hiring has occurred, and I'll just give you an example. I talked about the 10,000 jobs that were cut last year. Well, they're increasing that management level job. The EXs have been increased by 150. And so it makes me wonder, where are they staffing up? Are these frontline workers? And so an analysis has to be done by department and agency to look at how do you ensure that those services are delivered and delivered responsibly, on time, and available. People do not want chat boxes. What they want to do is deal with the human being, especially when it comes to their employment insurance, when they are trying to apply for compassionate care benefits, veterans benefits. They don't want to deal with the chat box. And so we need to do a further analysis. And what concerns me is that this is a cookie cutter approach. It's 15% off the top, and then what? And I don't believe it's going to meet the goal of this government. After all, a budget is about a priority, the government's priorities, and the federal public service is the insurance to make sure those priorities are met. And I don't believe that this government understands how departments and agencies are interconnected. And that's what my concern is.
Now it seems to me what you're saying is that the government's almost putting the cart before the horse on this one, because there are, you mentioned chat boxes, which goes to technology, and we've heard that as a possible solution to rationalize the size of the federal service. What about other possibilities like redefining roles, looking at different efficiencies, melding roles together? How are you open to doing that with the federal government?
We've actually provided them a response to their expenditure review. And what we've told them is, in fact, there's ways to save money. And yes, technology can play a role when it comes to supporting workers to do their jobs. But they could also stop the use of costly consultants and contracting that work out. And I'll give you an example of that. Phoenix, the pay system that was supposed to solve all these issues and save billions of dollars, ended up costing the government and mainly taxpayers over $5 billion. And who ended up doing the work to bridge the issues? It was federal public sector workers' compensation advisors. And so here we are. We've seen that. Also embracing remote work. We have costly leases that we pay and buildings that are archaic. Why are we not repurposing them for affordable housing? which is a government priority. So yes, there is ways that we can save money. There's ways that we could do things better, but that's not the conversation we're having here. What we have are these cookie cutter approaches that happened under Chrétien, happened under Harper, and here we are repeating it again instead of having a real conversation on how do we build a public service that is better and more able to sustain any challenge that may come Canada's way.
Okay, you say cookie cutter, but I'm going to quote here the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, because they talk about the federal public service between 2013 and 2023 growing by about 30%, up against the private sector, which has only grown by 13%, up against the Canadian population, which has only grown by 15%. And in that, they say, despite that substantial growth in the federal public service, you are still, as consumers and Canadians, still dealing with delays, unanswered questions, long waits, long lineups. How does maintaining the status quo help move anything forward, as opposed to what the government is proposing? And I hear what you're saying, but by forcing a redistribution and a rethink, it does hold out the potential that things might get better in terms of outcomes.
So that's a very interesting point, because if you understand the way government works and departments work, you need to look at the service and what is required to build on that service. And looking at it from a blanket approach doesn't work. We're not dealing with widgets. What we're dealing with are people's lives and the programs that support them during difficult times. And the problem that we have right now is, yes, there's been a growth, but where is that growth? Is it the frontline workers? It's not. And I'll give you an example. Canada Food Inspection Agencies, the inspectors, they were cut under Harper. Do you know that they haven't been increased? There hasn't been any new inspectors. These are the people that make sure that the food on your table is safe. And we have other inspectors as well who are not checking every little bit, whether it's goods that are coming into Canada. We aren't doing that work. So that makes Canada vulnerable. But we're not looking at it from a safety-specific methodology. What we're doing is looking at it from a blanket approach. What I'm saying, though, is yes, without a doubt, we need to look at the federal public service. I agree. But we need to look at it from a different perspective. We are not a business. The government of Canada is there to take care of its people. And I don't believe it's going to be able to do that. In fact, we've seen departments starting to rehire. People are working overtime to make sure that they meet their commitments, and it's mandatory overtime. If there's that much work and you're rehiring, then you have a problem.
So, and we're having this discussion ahead of knowing what's actually in the budget come tomorrow. But if you were to suggest a process for this government, because it has stated it wants to save money on the operation side, how would you propose moving forward on that?
Well, there should be consulting with the staff unions. You should be speaking with the frontline workers that actually do the work and figure out what does it take to ensure that public service is at its most viable point. Another example, in this budget, there's supposed to be funding for 1,000 new border service agencies, the officers that do that coverage. And that's great. That's great. It's been understaffed. But what else do they need in order to be successful? And I'll tell you, the officers know that.
Well, this is just the beginning of the discussion, Sharon. Of course, as I say, the federal budget is tomorrow. But for this evening, thank you for the time.
Thank you so much.